Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today I am joined by Nicolas Moran, better known as the Chieftain on YouTube. He runs a fantastic channel on all things tank.
Tank, AFV, doctrinal, things like that. Out of interest, why do you always say I'm Ian McCollum? Because by now I would have thought most people know who you are.
You'd think so, but there's new people showing up every day. It just seems to be a good way to introduce the channel. At this point, if I don't, I get comments about people saying, "What?
You've changed your introduction.
You can't not tell me." So,
fair enough. Hello, everybody.
So we are here doing some cool collaborative video, which has already come out, if my scheduling is correct. So I'll include a link to our awesome collab video in the description. But while I had access to them, I figured this is a good opportunity to get some questions answered about armored vehicles. So I went to the awesome folks on Patreon who make Forgotten Weapons happen, and I got like 4 pages of questions. So we're going to see if we can trip him up here. All right. First question right off the bat from Justin. I would like to know more about the failure of the M85 machine gun and his opinion on the M231 port firing weapon, because no doubt it will be hilarious.
Well, the 231 is easy. You don't have one because I've never seen a bloody thing.
Really?
But by the time I got it, the Bradleys they'd long been removed. The Bradley came originally with 6 ports for the FPW, 2 on each side and 2 in the rear end. And very quickly, when they up-armored the Bradley, they blanked off the firing ports on the 2 sides. In theory, somewhere in the system, 231s do still exist for the 2 bulk ports in the rear ramp.
Okay.
But the practical reality is, if you're shooting at something directly out where your rear door is, you're probably long past time opening the rear door, getting out and dismounting your troops.
This makes sense.
That's my personal opinion. The other thing was that I was in a cav unit. We had M3s, not M2s, and you don't carry very many dismounts anyway. So that's the 231. I'm sorry I don't have much of an opinion on it.
You know, I should point out just very quickly, for folks who don't know you, who haven't yet subscribed to Chieftain's Hatch,
Not too much.
you did in fact serve in Iraq in an Abrams
Tanks.
and...
So I was in Iraq in a tank, and then eventually they moved me to Bradleys, and I commanded a cav troop. When I went to Afghanistan, we had to leave Bradleys behind, unfortunately.
Okay.
So the U.S. Army's policy, for those of you outside of the U.S., is that if you're an armor officer, that could be anything from a cav unit, an airborne cav unit in a Humvee, all the way through to M1 Abrams. And they like to kick people around a little bit to broaden their knowledge base. So that's how I ended up from tanks to Bradleys to a desk. Because once you're a field grade, you're not allowed to have fun anymore. So... okay, anyway, back to the M85. The M85 is an interesting one because you hear usually nothing but bad things about it.
Yeah.
And the odd thing is, though, there was a minority of folks who love the weapon. And it's kind of weird. Oh yeah, it was fantastic. I never had a problem with it on the range. All you had to do was just put a beer can under the ammunition feed supply.
What could go wrong?
Or something like that. Or you had to do this trick, and the thing would run flawlessly thereafter. Now, this trick, unfortunately, does not seem to have made it into the TM, into the technical manual of the operation of the M85. So I'm not sure how much credence I can give the M85 when some people say it works fine if you do this. There were some others that say, yes, it works fine. And one of them, I was just talking on my own channel. Ditsy Doo is the guy's name. Oh, maybe girl, but I'm going to assume a guy, given the year. And he was a small arms ordnance repairman back in the day. So yeah, like, if you followed the -10 to the letter, you did exactly what you were supposed to do, as you were supposed to do it per the manual, never a problem. Which is also a valuable point. However, if you have 2 machine guns that do more or less the same thing, the M85 and the M2, and one of them works very reliably if you do every single thing in the manual, and one of them works fairly reliably if you happen to have to skip a day or 2, or it falls off the side of the tank and you got to go pick it up again. There is an argument that the other one is probably the better in reality, regardless of the mechanical and design features that made the M85 better.
And really, the only thing the M85 did, the whole point of its existence, was to be a little bit smaller in the receiver to fit.
So the M60 had a little cupola for the TC. And you could also mount it on the Amtracs, back then the LVTB 71s. And the saving grace is that the U.S. Army basically never used the damn thing in combat. So we don't know how it would have truly performed in field conditions.
True. I knew a guy who actually did some of the design testing. Not the design work, but the actual testing of the gun at the Yuma Proving Ground. He was not a fan.
But this goes back to the discussion we had offline earlier about the M60, the machine gun, which by reputation is a horrible piece of rubbish.
True.
But how many people were complaining about it in Vietnam?
Right. In Vietnam, the guys loved them. They were brand new. The guns hadn't started to have all of the long-term problems that developed by the time guys like you had them in the reserves so much later. Yeah. All right. Next up is from Old Man Winter, who says, hull-mounted, coaxial, top-mounted. Which machine gun location is the most effective?
Coaxial is your default answer, although it depends. I suspect this is probably going to be a common answer in a lot of cases. It depends on the era, it depends on the purpose, and so on. So there's 5 different types of machine gun mount, I guess you could talk about it. So there is, if you want to start at the bottom and work your way up. So start at the bottom with the fixed hull mounted machine gun, which, as its name implies, is bolted to the tank. You can't, in order to aim the gun, you got to aim the entire tank.
I can already see a few problems here.
You can see if you will be surprised how long this lasted in service. So if you look at an M3 medium tank, the Grand, or D, depending where you're from, you will see a little bulge just where the driver is on the bottom left, 2 little bulges. That's where the twin fixed forward firing machine guns were to go. And they also came with dismount kits, so if you had to, you can dismount them, use them for perimeter security, whatever. Why you wanted to do that when you have a cannon and a turret up top, I don't know, but you could do it. But the problem was, somebody very quickly figured out, this was a complete waste of ammunition, a waste of space, and a waste of the driver's time. Plus, you don't have traverse stabilization. You have elevation stabilization on the 37 and 75, but not traverse. So can you imagine, you've got the 2 main weapons in the 2 cannons, or maybe the cannon and the coaxial and the turret, and if you had the American one, because you got more machine guns in the TC's cupola on top of the turret, trying to aim at something while the driver is going, hee, I'm going to go right, I'm going to go left, I'm going to go right, trying to spray machine guns. This isn't going to be very effective overall. So on almost every single picture you'll see of the M3, they never stop building the mounts for them, but you'll see that they've usually welded metal where the ports are.
Okay.
So you don't have a hole anymore where the machine gun used to be. But as I said, this lasted a very long time. Look at the post-war Soviet T-54 and some T-55s. There is a small little hole right in the middle of the bow where the PKT, the fixed PKT, could be mounted.
Okay, I have to interrupt you.
Okay.
I've got a question that has occurred to me.
Okay.
My understanding is with a tank, you've got like an accelerator and a clutch, or a brake.
A brake. Well,
and
sometimes a brake.
2 steering levers?
You can have steering levers, you can have a steering wheel.
What's the guy shooting the machine guns with? How does he trigger those guns?
Well, you can have a trigger on a plunger, maybe.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Or your left foot often isn't doing it, depending on the type of tank.
Okay.
Or maybe once he lines it up in the right direction, he just yanks down on the trigger.
That just occurred to me. I'm like, I thought you were like using all 4 limbs to steer.
Wait, why are there 6 pedals when there are only 4 directions?
All right.
Anyway, so that's the basic, literally hull-mounted machine gun. All right, so your next one coming up is the traditional hull-mounted machine gun, or a ball-mounted machine gun. And these started to phase out at the end of World War II, and much later than the designers wanted it. So if you look at the archive reports, the Ordnance Branch are going, we don't want to put a hull machine gun on the M26 Pershing. We want to put more ammo there, because ETO is insistent on having at least 70 rounds of ammo on any tank that we're going to send them. And right now, the T-26E1 can carry 40, I think it's 48. Easiest answer, get rid of the guy, do what the British did with Firefly, put a big-ass ammo rack where the bow gunner would ordinarily go, and you can also keep the bow nice and intact with no holes. If you make a hole, it creates a weak point, not just at the hole, but actually weakens the entire blade around it.
Makes sense.
And also, the bow is usually, there's a small vertical bit where the ball is, and so on and so forth. So it is all sorts of liabilities that Ordnance wanted to get rid of. But there was demand from the field not to remove it. Now, there's a couple of different reasons why you might want to do this. And the first thing is, if you have enemy to your front, especially at close range, nothing inside the tank can get on target faster within that little arc. Oh my god, there's a guy with a Panzerfaust, and you just swing it over and watch your tracer, because especially on the American tanks, there's no sights on the on the bow gun. It's just you're looking through your periscope, you see where your tracer are, and you walk your tracer on target. And you don't mind about the fact that you're wasting ammo, because the tank is carrying the next 3 boxes of ammo. So, ammunition conservation isn't a huge problem. Or the other possibility might be, and the reason you can't do it with the coaxial machine gun is because you've got to get the gunner onto target. So if he doesn't see it and the commander sees it, he's got to go through the whole target handoff process. Gunner, coax, troops, traverse right, steady, on, 50 yards, fire. By which time this guy with the Panzerfaust has just put a hole in your tank, which is going to cost money. You've got to plug it up. It's really inconvenient, especially if you're dead.
Replace whatever guy was sitting there.
Yeah, it's the size of it. And your next problem is that when you're on the move, you get a sort of semi-stabilized platform with the guy's shoulder doing this in the tank. I mean, he's not going to be hitting pinpoint targets, but again, you get the suppression effect.
Okay.
And it's only once you get to proper stabilized guns, for example on the Sherman, one of the stabilizer on the gun wasn't fantastic. It's overrated on the Sherman. And it's true, it's not as if you're plinking targets at 1,000 yards with a 76mm gun as you're careening downrange. But when you're spraying likely bushes, as you're doing 20 miles an hour with the machine gun, and you're walking it onto target, the stabilizer works very, very nicely. And that was a feature you couldn't do with coaxial machine guns on German or Soviet or whatever. So that was another advantage to having the whole mounted machine gun, is that you could fire it suppressively, at least on the move.
Okay.
So those are your 2 main advantages there. But by the end of the war, people were realizing, look, the ammunition's getting too big, we need the space. The weak points are getting too weak because the enemy guns are getting bigger. And whilst we acknowledged that on the M26 there is no stabilizer because we had to get rid of some of the room in order to put that 5th guy that you insisted on, and we had to put the ammo somewhere, so we had to sorry, no stabilizer. These arguments are not enough in favor to counter you want to have the extra bow gunner there. And doubtless also there are people complaining, but if you remove 1 guy, then you have less people available for maintenance, which is now an argument going over when you're going from 4-man crews to 3-man crews with autoloaders, which I've addressed in another video, and there's some arguments on that. So anyway, we've gone to 2 of the 5. The next one is a sponson-mounted machine gun, such as you might find on a World War I tank, or perhaps in 1939, there are 10 machine guns on this M2 medium, sort of stupidity. With the deflector plates I was talking about, to shoot into the trenches by shooting your own tank. It's
crazy stuff.
Yeah, wonderful. This pretty much got removed very quickly as a waste of manpower, or little subsidiary turrets like on the British A9 cruiser. It's just each one of these sponsor-mounted machine guns requires somebody to operate it. That somebody requires space. That space needs to be armored. The more space you have to armor, the heavier your tank is for the same level of armor.
Right.
So if you're no longer getting the same efficiency, why are you doing this? So if the sponsons went away, they were basically gone by the time the full operations kicked off in 1939.
Okay.
Well, I mean, they were still on the battlefield, but nobody was building them anymore. Going up to the coaxial machine gun, well, that's your accurate, I can shoot through windows at 800 yards with every round going through the window sort of thing. And you have to create your own beating zone with the coax. So with the regular machine gun, you just hold down the trigger and you automatically get a beaten zone. Well, with the coax, you got to shoot in a Z pattern just to make a good spread. So it's more accurate, longer range. The gunner, the person whose job it is supposed to be to kill people, he has a machine gun of his own at this point. And it's on modern tanks, it's up to the fire control system, so you can shoot on the move accurately. The coax machine gun is where it's at these days. Go up higher, you get to the flex mount machine gun, the AA guns, the M2, the Bren, the MG34, whatever gun you were using to shoot at airplanes with a flex mount going, what have you. They suffer some advantages and disadvantages. Great advantages is, I'm in an urban area, there's a guy on the 3rd floor, I'm going to machine gun, which you can't do with a lot of the machine guns. Or, hey, there's a guy in a helicopter up there. They're going to shoot up. And the thing about these air defense machine guns is they're not really expected to shoot down the attacking aircraft. Their function is to make the other guy miss.
Okay.
That's all you're trying to do. If you hit him, great. But as long as he doesn't hit you, your air defense gun, it's not an air destruction gun, your air defense gun has done its job. So that's why in World War II, you look at the way the Americans put caliber 50 on absolutely bloody everything. You see, the Germans were a victim of their own propaganda. So when, we've invaded Poland, we've invaded France, and all the newsreels see Panzers and Stukas, and the Americans going, holy crap, they got Panzers and Stukas, we need stuff to stop them. So the Americans build entire battalions and battalions of tank destroyers, purely optimized to destroy Panzers. And they put ridiculous amounts of emphasis into air defense, putting in the caliber 50 on everything. And we're a tank destroyer company, but you also get a platoon of anti-aircraft guns to go with you because of the air defense requirements of the Stukas and so on. So be careful what you put out there, lads. You might get a wrong answer. So you have those types of mounts. The next step is now you have a mechanized mount on a turret roof, the CROWS system, remotely operated caliber 50, or even the cupola mounted systems on the M60 and the earlier M1s, which are very precise. They can be fired from undercover. The nice thing about these is that you don't need to expose your tank to shoot them. You don't need to expose anything to shoot them.
That's the thing. The problem with that anti-aircraft gun is you have to get out to use it.
Yeah, or better yet, you get an infantryman right on the back. So look, you don't have to walk, but you're going to be exposed when you fire this. There's a cost to this. So if you look at an M1, with the, let's say I was an M1A1, but this works for the CROWS M1A2s as well, is that the caliber 50 is so high up that you can be in a completely turret down position. The only thing visible is the caliber 50 and little periscopic sight next to it. So on the gunnery range, for example, usually the clock starts for an engagement as soon as you drive forward and the tank is exposed to engage the target, because you have to expose the tank. But if you're shooting, let's say, a BRDM with a caliber 50, the clock starts as soon as you pull the trigger, because there's no exposure. The first thing, it's a wonderful little system to have that mechanized thing. So, but the problem with that, though, is it's not very reactive to things up there that you can't really see, and hence they went back to the flex mount for the A2. Now you've got the CROWS system, which has the thermal imager, it has a laser rangefinder, it's stabilized, and it's on top of the tank, and you don't have to get out to shoot it. All of a sudden, these remote weapon stations can be very useful. The only problem is that they make your tank look 25 feet tall, which is a problem that has not yet been entirely solved.
It's almost like everything has pros and cons to it.
It's kind of weird how that happened.
Crazy.
So that was the long answer to a short question.
That was a very interesting answer. Thank you. All right. Next up is from Andy, who says, my two favorite YouTubers together.
Woohoo! That's you and me, right?
I hope so. I might have several dozen questions, but I'll start with these related ones. Does he think the 25mm on the Bradley is still viable, and does the tow missile need to be replaced on the vehicle?
Stand over there, let me shoot at you with a 25mm. Let me know what you think of it. Yes and no. The 25mm myself, its one problem is that the HE charge in the 25mm is a little weak.
Okay.
It's not much of a burst. I mean, yeah, you don't. If one detonated here, I wouldn't be happy, but you do have to be pretty close.
Okay.
The biggest problem with it is, I think, fusing. Is that the 25mm HEI has an impact fuse, and that's all you can do with it. It goes that way, and it goes boom. Either once it reaches a certain distance of, I think it was like 2,800 meters. I'd have to look at the manual, or if it hits something, and that's your only options. The round is too small to make anything else feasible. Even if it was feasible, it would be too expensive to fit little microchips and fuses and radars into each one of the so many thousand rounds of 25 you're carrying in the back of your Bradley.
They experimented with a 25mm semi-auto shoulder-fired grenade launcher with smart fusing.
In the OICW, was that it?
A development from it,
okay.
Yeah. And one of the problems was there's so much space taken up by the electronic components that it's really kind of a pretty wimpy charge once it actually gets there.
Yeah. So I think that's probably the biggest argument in favor of upgrading the 25 on the Bradley. And, not so much the HE, but it's a factor, but also the fusing. If you look at the modern developments of tank ammunition and IFV ammunition, It's all about diffusing for everything except saber rounds.
Okay.
So right now the Abrams has got, in Marine Corps, for some reason the U.S. Army does not have HE rounds. But the Marines have HE rounds, and they also have canister and HEOR and MPAD and some heat maybe. And they're all going to be replaced by a single round type, the advanced multi-purpose round, which has a special fuse on it. They can set it to do all sorts of wonderful things, depending on what your target is.
Okay.
So you look at the 40 mm, maybe the 35 will do it as well on the Scandinavian CV90s, is, okay, there's troops in the trench over there. I shall laze to the trench, and the trench is 1,000 yards away, 1,000 meters, European, sorry, metric, 1,000 meters away. I'll set the gun to a 4-round burst, or 5-round burst, and the little computer inside the ammunition, because we're now talking a bigger round that has its computer in it, the first round will detonate at exactly whatever range it was, but your laser rangefinder might be slightly wrong, and the trench is only, say, wide. The second round will go beyond it and shoot and detonate about 5 meters beyond. The third round will shoot about 5 meters short, and the fourth round will shoot more or less in the middle. So the theory is one of these rounds of this burst is going to burst on top of the trench and come down and get you.
Wow, that's impressive.
The lethality of modern vehicles is absolutely scary. I mean, you can expect to kill or be killed very, very quickly in modern warfare. So here's a good argument for, hopefully we don't get into it with anybody, because it will not be pretty. And the 25 can't do that.
Okay.
Only a larger fuse round will.
Okay, that makes sense.
As for the, if you want to shoot at PCs or whatever, the 25 is fine. The 25 saber round will punch through anything short of a tank, and even some older tanks, regardless. So it's for the infantry, not the infantry support, for the anti-soft skin work that you need to change the anyway. As to the TOW missile, I don't know why they haven't fitted a TOW with a Javelin warhead yet. Or maybe they have, but the problem with the TOW, I think, is it just takes so damn long to get anywhere. Between you when you pull the trigger and when something gets hit 3,750 meters downrange, it's 20-odd seconds.
Okay.
That's a long time for somebody to be seeing the missile coming at you and then taking reactive actions like shooting at you with something faster than your missile. Which is part of the default stat. Somebody shooting at me with a missile, the first thing you do is you send a round downrange the other way, because your round will get to their vicinity before their missile hits you, and they're probably going to flinch, which means that their missile will probably miss.
Okay. The TOW is one of those continuously guided.
It's a sack. It's a sack. No, it's just sack loss. It's you just keep the crosshair on the target.
Okay.
And the missile will follow the crosshair. It's not quite joystick, which is Mac loss.
Okay.
But regardless, it's not fire and forget.
Right.
Javelin is fire and forget.
Okay.
So that's why I don't see any mechanical reason why you can't put a fire and forget seeker onto a TOW. Maybe there is a mechanical reason that somebody can tell me. But
okay.
That's my guess. It's probably just funny. We already have so many thousand TOWs in the system, and you'd have to spend the money refitting them, and maybe refitting the fire control system in Bradley to do it. So I don't think it's worth changing the TOW on Bradley.
Okay. Next up is from James. It says, I've driven cars with a bird's eye camera view. Are they using these systems on tanks nowadays?
You're talking about things like the cameras on the phone for parking?
No, I think he's talking about where they actually have them mounted in multiple places, and you look at a screen and you can see the top of your car and everything that's around it.
Yeah, so you use it for parking usually.
Yeah, I guess that's probably where people actually use it. Off-roading is what comes to mind for me.
Well, that's actually a good point. You can tell I live in a city. No, in fact, most vehicles, we don't even get rear view cameras. Although they've started. You look at some of the modern vehicles, and there are at least a rear view camera for the driver to drive in reverse. But you wonder why they haven't done that before. Anyway, for really, really close work, stuff like that, your TC can get out of the hatch and look over the edge. I've done that. Or, if it's really that narrow, usually you're not in that much of a hurry. I mean, if you're going to within inches on each side, you're not doing it quickly whether you got this bird's eye camera or not. At which point you might as well load or get out, ground guide us in. Let's say going to a keyhole position or something like that.
Okay.
So I don't see any reason for that. Now, the idea of using cameras to enhance situational awareness is another matter entirely. Shut the idea of using cameras to enhance situational awareness, not bird's eye down, but just camera here, camera there, especially in urban areas, that has been done.
Okay.
And there was an interesting experiment done by the British about two years ago, maybe a year and a half ago. For example, they put a camera on the end of the gun tube, so that all you had to do was just nudge forward, stick the end of the gun tube out. You can look right, you can look left, you can make sure that there's nothing there, and then commit the tank. Seems like a great
seems to
idea.
make a lot of sense.
It does. It doesn't work. The reason being is that the tankers were taking so damn long, checking everything out, that by the time they got to where they were going, there was a reception committee.
Oops.
So you have to be careful about these information overload things. That
unintended consequences.
Yeah, basically, it was a great idea and it worked mechanically. It just didn't work in practice. And you can say, well, the solution to this is more training. Yes, but that emphasis for self-preservation is probably going to override this, and you're still going to check and so on. So far, not many tanks have gone around with many views. Now, there are other things you can do. So, for example, if you're the driver in a CV90, you can view what the TC is looking at through his independent viewer, perhaps, through the monitor system. He has a monitor. So the TC maybe can take a break. Just put the vehicle in automatic scan, like the M1A2, the CITV has an automatic scanner feature, and then somebody else can just pull it up. And while the TC's doing some work or whatever, then the driver is doing the actual monitoring and scanning.
Okay.
So that's an option as well. That makes sense and is practical and is useful and can be and is in fact being used today.
Okay.
A lot of these answers we can actually go on for much longer and in much greater depth, but I'm trying. He wants this down to half an hour. It ain't gonna freaking happen.
No, this is not going to be half hours.
But
this is awesome.
We are still trying to cut it down.
Yes. Next up is from Alexi. Compared to how terrible the Humvee-mounted caliber 50s are often with headspace and timing issues, how bad were your secondary weapons when you were in the Abrams and the Bradley?
When you say headspace and timing issue, in the Army that can be one of two things. That's either the actual physical measure in headspace and timing in the caliber 50, or it's the idiot who's behind the caliber 50 trying to man it.
My thought is that this is referring to idiots behind the gun. That's where I'm going.
So I'm trying to figure out where's the connection with coaxial, and I didn't have any problems with the coax on either the caliber 50 or on the tank, on either the tank or the Bradley. The worst problem I had for my caliber 50 was solenoid went. So when you're on the A1, you're inside the vehicle because that's where the optic is, and there's a little handle up here, there's your elevation handle, and there's also the trigger. And you pull the trigger, there's a little solenoid, the solenoid pushes on a butterfly, sets off the caliber 50. The solenoid went out. Oh, horrors! I'm going to do this, stick my hand up here, and go tunk, 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 tunk.
It seems awkward, but
it works. And
okay.
The solenoid is not hard to change. You could, when you get back to your base, you unscrew it, you disconnect one or two cables, you go off the maintenance. Actually, I think we nicked it off the first ID tank. We were authorized to, because at that point, there was a period in Iraq that my platoon was I'm not going to say the number one priority of the entire damn war on terror. And parts were falling from the skies. I was missing a number one left side skirt. Give me that side skirt off your tank. It was January, or just before January of 05. The elections were happening in Mosul. Mosul had turned to crap. And there were no tanks in Mosul, and they wanted tanks. And the elections were the big thing in Iraq. Yeah, the first free elections since Saddam took over. And by God, these elections are going to go off without a hitch. Mosul has a problem. We have to fix the election. It's Mosul. We need tanks. Where are the tanks? You. That platoon. Give me that platoon. So, when I say we were the priority for the entire damn war, we were for those 2 days.
Fix everything.
And that was what I want. I actually did need a side skirt because it sent me a right side skirt instead of a left side skirt after we lost an accident with a head. And the head came out kind of okay. He didn't realize he'd hit the tank. That shows you what those heads are like. And so I needed a new side skirt. I needed a new caliber 50 solenoid. And I didn't have to wait for the supply situation to sort of out. But that was the only problem that I had. And the caliber 50 requires headspace and timing to be done. It's an M2. It's not one of the new ones with a quick,
It's not hard.
Barrel.
You just have to know what you're doing.
Yeah, it is. And I've never had an issue with it once I have started shooting.
Okay.
Because once it's set, it's set.
Right.
Unless you change the barrel out, which you probably don't. And in fairness, to avoid it, what we would sometimes do is when we dismount the caliber 50, we just dismount the entire gun instead of taking the barrel off and just put that inside the tank. Which may or may not have been the official way of doing it, but it worked. You didn't have to reset headspace and timing every time.
Okay.
So as long as you didn't lose your gauge, and somehow we kept acquiring extra gauges, and we don't know how because we were issued one per machine gun. I've got 2 downstairs, and to this day I have no idea how the hell I have them. So no, they worked. They did exactly what they were supposed to do, and I've always been a fan of the 240 anyway. Back in Irish service, it was the FN Mag, and I've always loved that gun. And I'm probably rare in the American tank industry or tank community that I prefer the 240 over the caliber 50.
Okay.
Most tankers will say they love Modus, and it's a great gun, but I prefer the 240.
Okay.
Just me.
John has a very simple question.
Which John? There's probably more than one John who watches your videos.
Probably. This is the John who is curious about what happens to spent cases in tanks. Because they're like big and stuff.
Well, unless it's a coaxial machine gun. When you have 11,000 rounds in your coax bin, well, okay, they're not all in the coax bin on the Abrams, but there's 11,000 rounds of 7.62 somewhere in an M1. That is a lot of spent casings that can be rolling around inside.
And links.
And so there is a bin underneath the coax that all this stuff gets filled in. And it'll take maybe about 500 rounds. If you don't empty out this shell casing bin before it gets utterly filled, the mountain of links is going to go up into your gun, and your gun will seize.
Oh, okay.
Which is very good. That's a self-correct. Yeah, you've got to stop shooting, and you have to empty it out. And the only way to empty it out in the M1 is it goes up through the hatch, scattered over the side.
Okay.
And it's the same with similar, except smaller numbers, with the shell casings off main guns. So you got a 105, let's say. Shell casing comes out, goes into usually a collection tray. If you're a civilized country, if you're not a civilized country, like say a Soviet T-34, it just falls onto the floor and starts rolling around, and hopefully nobody trips on the bloody thing, or it doesn't get caught in the turret basket if you have a turret basket, what have you. Your collector bin, for lack of a better term, which may or may not be a bin, it may just be part of the recoil guard that just happens to be in that shape in the right place to catch this stuff. You'll get maybe 8-9 rounds before that becomes filled. You can continue to fire the main gun, but the shell casing is going to go somewhere else, and you get caught up with things. You can keep 1 or 2 for toilet duty. The rest get flung out the hatch.
Okay.
There are some tanks that when you fire the gun, if it resets to a default position, the shell casing gets ejected. Well, not necessarily. Conqueror would be ejected no matter what way the gun was. Either at the side or at the back is an option. And modern tanks with the cellulose shell casings, they don't even have this problem anymore, because when you fire the gun, the shell casing gets burned up in the combustion. So all you're left with is the aft cap, which is yay thick, yay wide, and has a little primer stick on it. So you can put 15 or 20 of these things in the collector bin before you have to start flinging them out, or more usually you keep them and you turn them into ashtrays. Except for some reason customs wouldn't let us bring back ours from Iraq because they said that they were weapons.
How times have changed.
I have my own issues with customs. We probably should have hidden them in the whole stowage. People, they don't realize that there's a whole stowage bin in the M1, so they never look.
All right, Commissar Carl says...
A familiar name.
Sounds like he's a patron of both channels.
I think he is.
More people should be that. If most tanks of the 1930s could be defeated by anti-tank rifles or heavy machine guns, then was the cult of the machine gun in American tank design really such a bad idea?
I'm not sure I see the correlation between machine guns and anti-tank rifles. Now, that said, the Panzer I, in order to deal with T-26s, they developed a special cord ammunition for the MG-13 that could defeat T-26s at 150 yards.
I suspect what he's getting at is 50 cal. He says specifically heavy machine guns.
Okay.
Because the 50 Browning was intended originally as a anti-aircraft and anti-tank weapon.
the problem with the cult of the machine gun, as Harry Idy put it, is that they weren't just confined to having a couple of machine guns for anti-tank or anti-aircraft purposes. So unless you've really screwed up and you're surrounded on all four sides by enemy tanks, and that's why you need to have all the machine guns, which in fairness are caliber 30, usually on the M2 medium, on the four corners of the sponsons, all shooting in the same direction. And by the way, you got the turret machine gun, and sure, why not give the TC his flex-mounted machine gun up front, and the driver's got his machine gun. So you are now spraying everywhere these panzers, not necessarily panzers.
It sounds like the ending of Fury.
It does a little bit. And we can go on to a complete side discussion about Fury in a different video, perhaps.
Yes, I figured that would be the subject of some.
And so the cult of the machine gun wasn't about anti-tank stuff. The cult of the machine gun was about infantry. And it was a series of tests that the US did in about 38. I'd have to look up between 37 and 39, so I'm going to go with 38 as a compromise. The question that was posed was, is the machine gun actually the best weapon for use against infantry? We think it is. We put our money into it. We built them. Let's actually test it out.
Maybe they should have tested that before they built them. What am I thinking? That's a dumb idea.
Well, better late than never. So they stuck the 75 to the side of a T2E5, I think it was, and it looked a lot like the M3 medium, which actually ended up being the base design for the M3 medium. So when they had to make 75 tanks really quickly, oh, hang on, we did this last year. Let's just modify that. And they did a series of tests. Is it the machine gun or is it the 75mm with a much lower rate of fire but more boom? Which is better? So they analytically tested this, and this is something a lot of people I don't think realize about tanks, is that there is a lot of testing and a lot of proof of hypothesis usually that goes in somewhere eventually before anything is done. And they realized, the 75 is actually the better weapon. Oops, we might be overdoing this. Plus also, again, it comes down to the cult of the machine gun also required people to shoot these machine guns, which takes up the room inside the tank, which needs the armor to cover up the room, and makes the tank completely inefficient.
Okay.
So, yeah, the cult of the machine gun was wrong.
So
a couple of machine guns
was indeed a bad idea.
Yeah.
And
I should add, the T-26s that were being shot at 150 meters by the Panzer Is, they shot back from 200 meters.
Oops. Lee says, what are your feelings about the Swedish S-tank? Do you feel that the turretless design is made up for by the very low-profile body? Do you think, and I figured that's probably something you've talked about at some point.
I've got a video on the S-tank,
yes.
but so here's the thing about my Inside Hatch videos is I tend not to talk too much about the practical use of them. It's more technical overview of them.
Okay. He goes on. Do you think that future tanks might adopt a similar layout, assuming they're armed with guided munitions instead of a traditional cannon? Presumably not needing a rotating turret.
Okay, so the S-tank was a tank of its time. It was fantastic for it, but it couldn't work today.
Okay.
Because at the time, in the 60s, no tank could truly fire on the move. They had stabilizers that gave more or less in the right direction, but you still had to put up accurate rounds down range, you still had to stop. The S-tank couldn't fire on the move if it wanted to, except for the machine guns. But that said, it could get on target when it was on the move. It could get on target really damn quickly because of the turbine engine and the steering system it had. So it's surprisingly effective. And in testing, the British Army couldn't actually find any particular detriment compared to the Chieftains of not having a turret.
Okay.
So for its time, when nothing could do things that the S-tank couldn't do, the S-tank was fantastic. And especially when you start off the war, you're in the defense. Sweden wasn't going to go launching an invasion of bloody anybody. Why have a tank that's good in the offense? And the S-tank is absolutely brilliant in defense. So it was a product of its environment, its geographic use, the expected area that it would be used. And I should add, this is for those what is the best tank in the world questions, is who's using it, where are you using it, why are you using it. So the answer will be different depending on who you are, where you are, and when you are. I see no reason the tank wasn't absolutely outstandingly designed for what it was supposed to do. In future, as I say, no cannon-armed tank is going to work. I believe, if I recall correctly, the Swedes actually did develop a successor, an S-Tank 2, to compete against Leopard 2 and a few other tanks into the next Swedish tank program. And the Leopard 2 won with its conventional turret. So I think that tells you what the reality was of a turretless vehicle in 1990 or whenever it was the Swedes did their trials. When it comes to future guided missiles, I still think it's going to be a relatively large vehicle because guided missiles are not small.
That's true.
And the other thing is, the chances are they're going to be vertically launched. It's going to be, I would. Now you look at some missile-armed vehicles like the Striker, the British Striker, or the Perret that the Israelis which is basically an M60, that they took all the guts out of the M60 and they just filled the turret with missiles. So from the outside it looked like an M60 with a fake gun. But when it went to launch, just the entire roof went up into a big missile launcher system. And they carried maybe 16 missiles, can't remember off the top of my head. That's all. And a tank has 42 rounds. And this thing's got 16 missiles, and it's the same size, weight, and armor of a tank. So, I don't think tanks are going to get replaced by missile systems anytime soon anyway. They're not as effective. There are things that tanks can do that missile systems can't. With a cannon, you can't do with a missile system. And secondly, if you're going to have a vertical launch missile system, unless the missiles are really, really bloody small, like HVMs or something, you're going to have a very high vehicle. At which point you've lost the advantages of taking the turret off. Yes, I am aware that there were turreted, low-profile missile vehicles like the Soviet IT-2, I think it was. I'm not convinced that vehicle would work today, honestly. And if you look at other missile-armed vehicles like LAV-AT, the ITV, the FV-432 with the swing-fire system, and so on, what they usually ended up doing was solving the problem of the profile by simply having the missile, and this works for the Bradley as well, because when the Bradley's firing the tow, all you see is the tow launcher and the sight. The entire 10 feet of the rest of the vehicle is hiding behind something. So is a low profile on the missile really all that much of a problem anyway?
Okay. Alrighty. Andy says, with the Army running yet another competition for a vehicle that will essentially be a light tank or mobile gun,
oh gee, okay.
Do you think they'll actually follow through with procurement this time? This sounds very much to me like all of the Army's new small arms programs, where they ask for something that is effectively impossible.
Oh no,
they remarkably don't get it, and nothing changes.
Oh no, this is definitely possible.
Okay.
The Army's requirement for a light mobile gun system dates back to the 1980s, the high-tech light. Actually, you can argue before that, but I'm going to go with the 1980s in its current iteration. The high-technology lightweight division, I think it was 7th Infantry was converted to this. And one of the things they wanted to do is, look, we're flying troops around the world, 82nd Airborne, 101st Airborne, whatever. They might want to have something with a bit of bang. And the Sheridan was the vehicle to do that until about 1992, when they finally said that we've had enough of this, let's get rid of it. And so the CCVL was created, and if you don't want a CCVL, look up the M8 AGS armor gun system. It's basically a precursor to this. There were a couple of other similar competitors in that category, RDF, and maybe even beyond that. You can argue the M56 Scorpion was one of these as well. And there is definitely a need. If you are mucking around just because you had to be light to get to where you're going, doesn't mean that the people who are already there had to be light.
Right.
And they could very well have defenses that require the suitable application of a 105mm hip round, or something like that. If this is going to be the format of a light tank, like the M8, which yet again, British Aerospace is flogging to fit this Army requirement, or the Striker MGS, or if it could be something like a Humvee with the 25mm chain gun, the low recoil, it's basically a Bushmaster, which has a barrel this long.
Okay.
Which you can actually fire off a Humvee. They tried it with the regular Bushmaster, didn't work, blew the windshield apart. If that 25mm on Humvee can do it, so much the better. So to finish off on this topic of lightweight fire support vehicles,
yes,
there is a definite need for it. The technology exists for it, exactly the format. As I say, if it's going to be a 105 vehicle or just a 25 on Humvee, that the Army can figure that out for themselves. The question is there the funding available to do it? Compared to everything else that the Army needs, or the Air Force needs, or the Navy needs, like spare parts for their F-18s. is the acquisition of this vehicle worth it, especially given how often we are likely to be using these airborne divisions in such a role?
Okay.
So that is a matter for people with much higher pay grades than me, although I suspect no is your answer.
Okay.
Just on past history, I suspect no.
Yeah, that's the easy answer, certainly. Steve says, my question would be on the continued use of the M3 75mm gun on the Sherman right up to the end of the war. My understanding is that the 75 offered a superior HE round compared to the 76, which is why it was preferred, but what made the 75 HE superior? Was it greater velocity of the longer-barreled 76? Was it that the greater velocity of the long-barreled 76 reduced HE effectiveness, or was the round itself somehow different?
Oh, the round itself is different. If you're lobbing a round at a higher velocity, it's going to have a thicker wall to hold itself together under the increased pressure.
Okay.
If you make a thicker wall, that means that you got less room inside the shell to carry HE. So that's the short answer, is that you needed more structural strength, which meant less internal volume.
Makes sense. I wonder if the rifling twist was different.
It probably was.
Because that's going to be compounded by your rotational
centripetal force
yeah.
going out, yeah.
You get that with bullets, too.
Mm.
You can't shoot a cast lead bullet at rifle velocities, because it'll go as soon as it exits the
That's
barrel.
actually an excellent point. You were correct. At the higher velocity, you will have that increased force.
Yeah.
Which further will require the thickening of the shell casing.
Cool. I never thought about the fact that higher velocity means thicker wall.
Well, I mean, you don't walk around with high explosive rounds much in your.
Not so much. The explosive payload capacity of a 30 cal rifle is not huge.
On one of my videos, I don't know if you saw it. I mentioned how if you want to see at Rock Island all these pop guns, go to Ian's channel. And somebody took great offence at this on your behalf, that I should refer to them as pop guns. But it's kind of, there's a joke that if you're doing dismounted infantry training as a tanker, you got to do M16 or you got to whatever. And of course, they never give you ammo for these things because we're too damn cheap. So you got to yell bang. Except if you're a tanker, you get down on the ground and you start yelling pop, 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 pew, pew, pew. I'm sure the artillery people do the same thing.
Yes, I suspect so. Stanislaw, and we got a couple questions along the same vein, so we're compiling them all together into Stanislaw's. The idea of mounting a 20 to 30 millimeter autocannon on a tank as a secondary weapon appears frequently but never seems to be adopted. Why?
Well, it is adopted. Has been. It's probably a better word. Also depends how you define a tank. I mean, you look at BMP-3, which has a 100 millimeter rifle and a 30 millimeter and a 7.62.
That's substantial.
It's technically an IFV, but when you're on the receiving end of a 100 millimeter gun, I don't think it really matters to you if it's being fired from a light armored vehicle or from a T-55.
That sounds like some of the South African stuff.
Well, it's tracked. This one's tracked.
Okay.
Although in theory, I guess you could perhaps put that turret on a BTR. I don't know if anybody's tried it. I don't see why. Of course, you go to Africa, they'll probably try to put it on the back of a Toyota Hilux.
Right.
as they would. 20mm coaxes, you go back to the AMX-30, the French AMX-30 entered service with a 20mm coax. The Panzer 61 of the Swiss Army entered service with a 20mm coax. The MBT-70, which didn't enter service, but the prototypes were certainly built and tested, that had a 20mm. It wasn't a coax, it was on this kind of like compartment that when you push the 20mm button, and this 20mm would go at the turret top. Looks awesome, cool.
That sounds like a terrible idea. That sounds super cool.
Yeah. Oddly enough, that never went beyond the MBT-70.
Weird.
Or Kampfpanzer's Ziepsen. The idea behind it, there's two possible ideas. One is that this gives you something with a bit of punch that you can use to deal with things that don't require the use of a main gun round, which at the time would have been a 105. The alternate idea is that this is something that you can use against helicopters or still flying aircraft. So if you look at the AMX-30, the main gun on the AMX-30 had an elevation range, if I recall, of about 20 degrees up and down. The 20mm, as I recall, had an elevation of 45.
Okay.
And I'm hoping I'm recalling because I looked this up about an hour before this video. Heads up that this question was coming. And and also if you're in an urban area,
right,
and you want to shoot something at the third floor, the 20mm will do very nicely. It'll go through the wall,
Yeah.
and it'll get at something that's close to you and high up. But as ever, it comes with a cost.
You can't fit nearly as much 20mm ammo as you can 30 cal.
And you can't fit nearly as much main gun ammo. So again, look at the AMX-30. Carries 47 rounds of 105. And an additional, I think it was 800 rounds of 20mm. The Leopard 1 carries 60 or 63 rounds of 105. The M60 carries, I think, 63 to 65 rounds of 105. So you're losing 15 to 20 rounds of big boom for the sake of having this 20mm coax. And the reality was that the gunners soon figured out that if it was worth firing a 20mm at, shoot the 105. You're not paying for the bill. Somebody else is paying for the 105mm rounds. And get rid of the 20mm, get the extra space, put extra coax in there, put extra, and again, coax for an AMX-30. If you're shooting at a troop target, all of a sudden, all you have to shoot the troops with is either the main gun round, which is what you're not supposed to shoot, that's why you put the 20 in there,
Right.
or you have the 800 rounds of 20mm, which, granted, is a significant emotional event for the guy who's receiving the 20, but once you've run out of rounds, then everybody else is happy.
Right.
No, that's unhappy.
Yeah.
So the idea of having a larger caliber coax is still in the French army. If you look at the French Leclerc, they got a caliber 50 as their coax.
Okay.
And the US tried it as well. The M47, you have a choice. The mounting point for the coax was such that you could either stick a caliber 30 or you could stick the caliber 50, your call, whichever you wanted to do. But again, you probably had a caliber 50 up top. I can see an advantage. I think caliber 50 is actually a pretty good compromise.
Okay.
Because you do still get the fire control system, you still get the extended range of the caliber 50, and you don't have ridiculously huge amounts of ammo. But a lot of this has become redundant with the advent of Crows systems, again, on top of the tank. So you can put the caliber 50 on a Crows system, you get the laser rangefinder, you get the stabilization. There's no advantage to putting the big space of the gun inside the armored compartment. Or even with the 7.62, the Marines, I believe, put a Crows for the 7.62 for the loader with a little TV screen, that he can be inside the tank if he's not slinging 120 rounds, and if he doesn't have to do work with the coaxial 7.62, he has a stabilized thermal imager equipped 7.62 to play with.
Okay.
So I think a lot of these discussions have become overtaken by events.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But at the time, there were some armies that said, let's go with the large coax. And then you have the BMP-3, which I mentioned at the beginning.
Which has everything.
Which is everything, and there's probably a reason that no other vehicle has done this, to my knowledge.
Yeah. Okay. Next up, Mr. Lee says, with the headlong development and push for unmanned multi-use vehicles, do you see man-portable anti-armor weapons continuing to be viable, or are we entering another era where they're as obsolete as anti-tank rifles were by World War II?
I'm going to assume that what you mean by this question is that you can use one of these unmanned ground vehicles in the anti-tank role, as opposed to not needing an anti-tank system to kill the unmanned ground vehicles. Because I think you will still need an unmanned anti-tank system. You will still need an anti-tank system to kill the unmanned ground vehicle.
If anything,
if it's a tank, it's still a tank, whether there's somebody in it or not.
And the unmanned vehicle is probably going to be better protected than a manned vehicle, for the reasons you were just talking about with having 10 machine gunners in your tank. If you have 0 crew, then you have a much smaller vehicle and you can afford to armor it up more heavily.
Which again is one of the things people complain about the Soviet tanks. The 3-man Soviet tanks, which are only 42 tons. Well, the reason they have 42 tons, but still the same effective thickness as a 60-ton tank, is because they don't have the extra man.
Right.
Again, go to my offload video, plug. So it's a long argument, so it's not as simple as you'd think. Now, I don't think we're anywhere near unmanned, large-scale deployment of unmanned ground combat vehicles yet, for 2 reasons. One, nothing is as yet going to affect the judgment call of somebody sticking his head out the hatch, looking at the ground going, I'm not sure if I can make that. An unmanned ground vehicle isn't going to be able to do that. This isn't as simple as flying around in the air where there is nothing to crash into. I know, I've apologized. I have let go of the control and gone in the back and started rooting around, safe in the knowledge that I'm not likely to hit anything. And the second problem is Once you make that mistake and you go, oh, maybe I shouldn't have gone in, or maybe I should have had my loader get out and walk into the river to see just how deep it really is, somebody has still got to get out, hook up a tow cable, and haul the bloody thing back out again. Now, it's not to say that you can't perhaps put an unmanned wing tank, so you have a platoon, 2 tanks manned, 2 tanks are unmanned.
And the unmanned one gets to go first.
Well, you still probably want to have... No, yes and no. The argument's both ways. But again, when you get to the obstacle, you still have to have the manned guy get out and kind of go like this. Or another thing you might do is, with engagement area development, is if you have time, you're setting up a defensive position, what you're supposed to do is get your ass out of the tank, walk or take the Humvee a kilometer the other way, so you can see from the enemy's perspective what it is you're doing. And you want to do that not in your tank because you don't want to have this big signature of tank tracks or whatever else going along. You can't do that if you've got unmanned vehicles.
This is true.
Oh, I'm going to send a drone. You're going... It's not the same, trust me. So, once we assume that unmanned vehicles are on the battlefield in some format 20 to 30 years in the future, when the definition of a manned portable anti-tank weapon isn't a laser disruptor, or whatever the hell else that they're going to come up with in the intervening 30 years, you will still need the manned portable thing to destroy the other unmanned thing. And the chances are that the manned portable thing is still cheaper and can be provided in greater numbers than the unmanned thing. So, you're not going to be stuck going, damn, I wish I had this unmanned, anti-unmanned thing that I can use.
This is getting deep.
When instead, I could just be issued 5 Javelin missiles, which 20 years from now will either cost ridiculously expensive amounts or almost nothing because the technology is so cheap, whichever way the procurement system goes. So, long answer there, no, I don't think they're going away.
All right.
And you can also use them against bunkers.
There you go. Phase says, what was a tank crewman's service with small arms like? We actually got a bunch of questions on this general topic as well. What did they use them for? What features did they prioritize? And what did you like or wish that you could get something different? That sort of thing.
Okay, so small arms for tank crews. There is one reason for a small crewman in an AFV really. Well, okay, there's 2, but it's one important reason for a crewman to have a small arm. And that is something that's gone hideously and horribly wrong. If the enemy is approaching and you cannot shoot them with the 120, and you cannot shoot them with the caliber 50, and you cannot shoot them with the 2 7.62s, and you cannot run over them, and you're down to your small arms.
This doesn't sound like it's going to end well.
Really at this point, your function in life is to get the hell out of your tank and go find one that works. Or fix your tank, in which case you're not going to be shooting anybody anyway. If you can fix your tank because there's nobody nearby, fix your tank. If you can't fix your tank because it's dangerous, go away, get another tank. Save yourself. Your function, you're not an infantryman. People spend a lot of money training you to be a tanker. By God, go get another tank. So the purpose of the small arm at this point is to make sure that you can escape. You're not trying to kill the enemy at this point. You don't care. All you care about is leaving. And whatever it takes to keep that guy's head down while you're running away, that's what. So you want a lot of bang, or a lot of pew, more accurately. Much pew, whilst you run away with something that is not going to encumber you too much whilst you are bravely advancing to the rear. And also, of course, the other thing is, this is an emergency backup weapon. You don't want it to take up too much space in your tank. You don't want... I mean, your tanker holster goes here. It's a small little pistol. Well, okay, it's a full-size pistol, but compared to the other weapons you're issued with, it's a small little pistol. It doesn't get in your way. It's climbing in and out of the tank. That's all you want. You want it to go bang. You want it to keep the other guy's head down. And beyond that, you really don't care. Now, the Army will issue you with 1 or 2 M16s for the crew, and there's a dismount kit you can get for the 240. So the loader can take his 240 and you attach his dismount kit like a little bipod or whatever. You can run away with the 240. In actual reality, if you are bailing out of your tank, I don't know if you're going to waste your time grabbing this dismount kit and mounting it onto the 240. You're just going to get your ass and go. The only exception to having a good small arm was when I was in an urban area I had my carbine, and again, the Army gave me all sorts of stuff. It was like a 249 a year, whatever it was. So I had my carbine on the outside of the tank, so that if we were in an urban area, I could grab the carbine,
Both equally appropriate.
I know this is a long-running argument with people.
For me, it's carbine, but it's different parts of the U.S.
Well, that and it's the boot of the car, not the trunk. But
What is it in French?
It would be carbine, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. Question solved.
He's right. Assuming that it is actually a French word.
It is.
Where does the car come from?
I don't know the etymology of it.
The fusil would be a gun, so it wouldn't be.
Carbine is the short one. Carabine, mousqueton, et fusil.
I'm going to have to retrain myself now to say carbine.
No, you don't, because carbine is equally appropriate.
I know, but I'm one of those people that likes to get it right. So I had arguments on the radio. I said, I'm going to pull down the antennae on my tank. You know what? My antennae. You mean your antennas? No, AE is the plural of antenna. Bullshit. No, really, it is. One of my platoon sergeant was a teacher in civilian life, and he gets on the radio. Yep, 3, he's true. Antennae is the old English plural. What do you mean old English? I'm still speaking. So language, when you were basically, I'm a foreigner. I'm a U.S. citizen by birth, but effectively people think I'm a foreigner. And you're trying to speak in the English that you have learned for decades in an American tank unit. It doesn't always work.
Yeah, I bet it doesn't.
Especially not when you got some other guys. So one of my units, we had a guy from Guam. We had to get somebody from the Midwest to interpret between us. The only guy who could speak both. I'm sorry. I've got carbine.
So you had
carbine on roof. So I had the rifle that I could bring up because again the tank's weapons don't work at close combat at high range. There's even in the manual there's a little diagram that lets you know the average third-story building you can engage with the main gun at such and such a distance, like 200 yards, whatever. So for quick reaction, you have the carbine.
M16.
M4. But again, the exact details of it, I mean, was it a little bit forward heavy? Would I prefer a Star? I'm a great bullpup fan. I own plenty of bullpups, and I love the things. But the practical reality is, I don't give a damn. If I can hold it, if I can shoot in the general direction of the person who's trying to kill me long enough for me to get away, the small arm has done its job. What was the training like for it? It was exactly the same as an infantryman. You go, you shoot your Army qualification standard. It is the Army qualification standard for the M4. It's not the tanker qualification standard. And once or twice we did an impromptu range where I'd drive the tank past the targets and I'd shoot with the M4 and would hope for the best. And if I hit anything, I don't know. It wasn't a scored target. It was more of a fan fire.
Okay.
So that's the bottom line with small arms for tank crews. We generally don't care.
It's like they say, your pistol is the thing that you use to fight your way back to the rifle that you should have had in the first place.
Or in our case, the tank.
Your small arms are the things you use to get back to the tank, which is what you should have been using in the first place.
Or just get new ones. Okay, it's an occupational hazard. I mean, if you drop your rifle, you can be blamed for it, but if somebody blows the shit out of your tank, it may or may not be your fault.
Okay. Anthony says, what is or are the oldest tanks that would be considered not obsolete? As in, how far back could one go, and with an available upgrade package or late factory configuration, stand even like a 60-40 chance with equally competent crews against a truly modern tank like an M1A2 Abrams?
A T-55. It's about as old as it gets right now. It's still in use.
Okay.
Unless you count the South African Oliphants, which is Centurions, which are about the same age, although they've been rebuilt so much. So here's the thing.
A T-55 could actually, with a competent crew, take on and defeat an M1A2?
Sure.
Okay.
They'd have to work at it.
Okay.
I mean, you can't just go up at the front to, hey, look, there's an M1A2, and shoot it from the front and expect to kill. That's not going to work. But, okay, so you go back to World War II again, because it's the last major even tank combat, and you look at the statistics. The statistics are, and this happens for fighter aircraft as well, is that most kills happen from the side or the rear, where they didn't even know they were being shot at in the first place.
Hmm.
A 100mm rifle is plenty capable of shooting through the side of an M1.
Okay.
So if you have a switched arm crew, that is able to get a side shot, and even if it's just he got lucky or he sacrificed, 2 battalions were sacrificed in order for this one company to get around the side. It doesn't matter. The T-50, and they've upgraded them. They put missile systems. The AT-10 Stabber can be fired out of a T-55. They've put laser rangefinders on them. They put low warning receivers. They put reactive armor. It's not enough to put a standard battle here versus here and you can win. But again, go back to 1945. King Tiger, ridiculously armored, ridiculously well armed, versus Sherman, not so well armored enough, not so ridiculously well armed, but armed enough. Did we or did we not kill King Tigers? Now, granted, a lot of the King Tigers killed themselves by simply breaking down, but there were still engagements that you could shoot at these things from the side. Even a Panther, from the front, was about as dangerous as a King Tiger. Why is that? The King Tiger has more armor and has a bigger gun. It doesn't matter. If it's enough, it's enough.
Right.
If 100 millimeters will stop around and 120 millimeters will stop around, it doesn't matter to the round which of the two you're shooting at.
Right.
And it's the same going the other way. The high velocity 75 and the high velocity 88 both have a pretty reasonable chance of going through a Sherman. So it's really a matter of, no matter what you're facing, you got to get around the side. Well, guess what? Shermans did. They got around the side. So what can a T-55 do? It's going to get around the side eventually, unless everything goes well. Again, we're talking about equally competent crews. That also assumes equally competent rest of the army, with the Air Force is equally competent, artillery and recon vehicles that are equally competent
To allow the situation to
because
exist.
because a battle is never just a tank on a tank. It's a rifleman is never faces off against a rifleman. Which this rifle is better than that rifle, so it doesn't matter.
Right, exactly, it doesn't.
I mean, just because this guy is nothing but 1919s, this crowd is nothing but MG34s.
Germans had a lot of Sturmgewehrs, then it didn't.
But the guy with the 1919 has a radio, and there's a three artillery regiment 105 time on target on the other end of the radio. My money's on the guy with the 1919s
And the radio, yeah. Kazuki says do or did.
Really, she's on your sorry, Kazuki K.
I did not include last.
Every time I do a Q&A, Kazuki K gives me 2 questions.
All right. Do or did armored fighting vehicle coaxial weapons get any kind of special ammunition designed specifically for AFVs? Sounds like tracer, sort of.
Not really. But ranging machine guns, yes. So the caliber 50 ranging machine gun that you'd find on a Centurion or a early Chieftain, that had special exploding ammunition, because the whole point of ranging machine gun is you got to see where the hell the round landed.
Spot around.
Tracer, yeah, basically. Some recordless rifles would do the same thing. So tracer ammo is great for seeing roughly where it's going, but it doesn't give you a perfect, this is where it exploded. The range-finding ammo for the caliber 50, 3-round burst, whatever, that's specifically designed to be visible.
And I presume to match the ballistic path of the main gun.
Correct. Usually. It's actually not required, because as long as your sight is graduated correctly, so if they don't ballistically match, they usually do, they're usually sensible enough to do this, but if they don't, you just make sure you're looking at the caliber 50 scale.
Okay.
And you figure out what the range is, and then you apply that to the main gun. There are some certain weapons which are, for example, I don't know for sure, but I would not be surprised if the ammunition for the chain gun 7.62 on a British Challenger 2, the links may or may not be the same as the links for the 7.62, whatever the British designation is for the GBMG. That may or may not be the case. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a difference there. There was I mentioned the Panzer Is with their machine guns. It wasn't a coax, but it was a main machine gun. They had the special armor-piercing cord ammo specifically for use against the AFVs. The M85 that we talked about before, that had its own special type of ammunition as well, but that may have just been for the M85.
It had to have a very special link to actually work properly in the M85.
Yeah.
I think the ammo was standard, but the links were different.
So they did kind of exist, but generally speaking, on the M1 or the Bradley, the 7.62 for the 240 is exactly the same box of 7.62, like 1 round in 4s, 1 round in 5s of tracer or whatever, as your infantry machine gun would have. and I can't offhand think of anything that was the same caliber as the infantry weapon, but not the same ammo. So again, the Royal Armour Corps with the Beza 8mm versus the entire rest of the British Army is using 303. But that was a function of the weapon requirements to go in the vehicle, not a function of just it was a vehicle.
And it was standard 8mm ammo.
Yeah.
Okay. Straker says, how effective were anti-tank rifles on World War II armor? I'm thinking particularly of the widespread Russian use of anti-tank rifles and the German adoption of Schutzen sidearm.
You've almost answered your own question there. It was effective enough that the Germans went to the trouble of developing Schutzen and developing the Panther II with the thicker side armor. Now, of course, the end result was that eventually tank armor became so effective that the ATRs became ineffective at killing tanks. And again, remember, an ATR rifle, there's no explode usually. I don't know about the 20mm. Is there any in the...
Well, we're talking 14.5s here.
Well, I don't know if he said specifically Russian, did he?
He said specifically widespread Russian use of anti-tank rifles.
But I am curious now to bring it up. Did the 20mm, the Solothurn or the Lati, did it have an explosive charge?
It was available, but the AP ammo would not have.
Okay.
That's one where they'd have AP and AG.
Okay, gotcha.
The 14.5 is a darn effective. Several of the Russian AT rifle calibers, World War II and then later, were very high velocity rounds. That 14.5 is, I can't remember the bullet weight, but it's bigger than a 50. So a 50 is what, 700 grains? It was a big bullet traveling at something like 3,000 feet per second.
I mean, again, you remember a Panther's side armor at the hull is 3 centimeters. So, and your typical, your 14.5 PTRD, in theory, could go maybe on paper 31 at 100 yards, or something really, really close to that. And that is a perpendicular, not at an angle.
Right.
Yet, the practical reality was, and this is what I always keep telling people, is it doesn't matter what the paper statistics say. Real life doesn't read paper statistics. The practical reality was that these were effective enough that the Germans started a program to deal with the problem. So, yes, the PTRDs were effective, and when they finally got up armored to the point that you couldn't even shoot at the side of these things, they were still issued in wide numbers, because having a PTRD that could knock out optics or tank commanders or whatever long range, or maybe even if you shot at the tracks, you might jam the track.
I was going to say, what about wheels? Wouldn't that be more vulnerable to a bullet like that?
Well, the wheel on the tank is not going to notice. And if you punch a hole in the wheel, what do you do? Or even if you slightly deform the tire on the road wheel, it's just going to go as it goes along.
Okay.
So that's not going to be it. But the optics, maybe even the bow machine gun, if you can hit that, or the personnel, as I say, radio antenna. There are all sorts of things that you can mission kill a tank. You don't have to penetrate a tank to kill it. And that's another thing a lot of people will forget. These are the paper statistics. This cannot kill this. Rubbish, it can't kill that. We have plenty of evidence that things that can't kill things have killed things. So there was a reason that these things were still issued all the way through the end of the war.
And they had a ton of them.
They were.
They built those things. They had two. They had the PTRD, which is the single-shot one, and they had the PTRS, which is basically a 14.5mm SKS. And 5-round clip, semi-auto. Actually had an end block clip. Semi-auto. But
it has to be semi-auto. I'd love to see how they had full auto.
I'd
love to see the guy's shoulder after full auto.
Yeah, I don't think they actually made full auto versions of them. But
you know, there was some guy with a matchstick, like an L1. Right?
Yeah. But yeah, they built both. They had a design competition, came up with both designs, went, right, awesome. Both of you get to work.
And again, if the thing isn't useful, militaries generally will not build them.
Yeah.
So obviously the Soviets certainly thought there was benefit to them, and the Germans thought there was effectiveness to them. So I guess there's your answer by default.
Had a lot of half-tracks driving around too.
There is that.
Alan says, I never hear much discussion about the optics and fire control systems of World War II tanks, yet these seem important. Was this a significant design element at the time, or were they pretty much all the same? You've kind of already alluded to the Sherman having a stabilization system that others did not.
So the tank isn't a weapon, it is a weapon system. So just having a gun on it means nothing if you can't get steel on target. And that's where your optics come in. and people will focus a lot on the quality of optics. So, I mean, you pick up a spotter scope or a rifle scope, you look at it, and you'll probably make comments like, okay, the clarity on this is great. There's 95% of the light that comes in comes out the other end, and I can easily see the reticle and so on. And that is part of it. It is good to have a good clear optic, and the Germans were fantastic at this. On the other hand, what the Germans were not fantastic at was putting them somewhere where they were useful.
Okay.
So if you look at a German tank, almost every German tank, I'm not going to leave out the assault guns because they kind of got this right, but almost every German tank, there is one sight for the gunner. It's down low in the mountain, more or less at the same level as the main gun. How much can you see when you're in an ambush position with the sight in this position? So if you're in ambushing, you're obviously hiding. You're in a whole turret down position. You got as little of the tank visible as possible. Hopefully it's just the commander's head with his binoculars scanning around going, there's a T-34, 1 o'clock, driver advance. The gunner can't see shit because his sight is way down low. All he can see is the hill that he's hiding behind or the bushes or whatever. So he's got to, once he's in roughly the right general direction, because the commander said 1 o'clock, so he scans at 1 o'clock. He gets up there, the gun's not stabilized, it can be pointing wherever the hell it's pointing, so crank, 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 to get down to, there's the ground. Now, where's that T-34? Oh, there it is, and he picks it up, and then he starts the engagement process. Whereas if you look at a T-34, or a Sherman, or a Cromwell, or basically any other country's tank, maybe not the Japanese, I haven't really looked for this, is they have a sight on the roof. So whilst the commander is scanning around, the gunner is also scanning around. And so, gunner, there's a T-34 to your right, there's a Panzer IV to your right. 1 o'clock, scan to 1 o'clock, he scans to 1 o'clock and he sees, there it is, it's just to the right of the large red barn, and it's moving left to right, so I know exactly what to look for if I put my head down to the high power side, or I can just engage from this side directly. Away you go. If you're stabilized, you don't have to worry about this, because the gun will always be more or less in the right place, so as soon as the tank stops, just fine-tune, send around downrange immediately. If you're not stabilized, at least you know when you go down here, there's the red barn, I know where it is in relation to the red barn. And you can get on target much quicker. So that's where it doesn't, you can have the best optic in the world, but if it's not where you can use it,
that makes sense. Yeah.
What's the point? Now, there are other factors. So, for example, the one thing the German sites did right was they had little range estimations, strict, little triangles, which are X many mils, like 3 mils per each side of the triangle. And if you knew how wide your enemy tank was, you could estimate how many mils it was. And today we use this in the sight. If you look at the crosshair, the reticle on an M1 Abrams, it's got a little dot, which is half a mil. You've got 2.5 mils, I think, to the circle, and then there's a 2.5 mil line, and there's a 5 mil gap, and then there's another 5 mils in the height. And using all this information, even on a modern tank, which has laser rangefinders, you still have this mil scale that you can use to estimate range. American tanks didn't have that. They didn't even have a choke sight, like we have in the auxiliaries, which is a graduated reticle, that you simply put it onto the target. Once the top of the line meets the top of the vehicle and the bottom of the line meets the bottom of the vehicle, that's more or less good enough. A funnel sight, I think the Air Force guys call it.
Okay.
And that'll give you pretty much the right estimate. With Bradley, it's just kind of you elevate until the two sides touch and then you pull the trigger. It's fantastic. American tanks didn't have this back in World War II, so you were absolutely reliant on the TC eyeballing the range. Maybe his binoculars had a little mil graduation, so that was a downside to the side. On the other hand, most engagements in World War II happened at a small range.
Effectively,
didn't really we call it battle sight range.
Okay.
But in hunters will know it as maximum point blank.
Yep.
Which is basically, if you fire at this range, no matter what the arc is, it's going to hit the tank-sized target within 1,000 meters. Right. I think back in World War II, it was 800 meters was battle sight range, give or take. And in Northwest Europe, they said the average range was 700 and something meters. This is true, it is the average range, it's in the mathematical mean, but there's a couple of, there's like 4 or 5 2,000 meter range engagements which skew the average. The median range is about 500. So range estimation wasn't that big a deal for what the Americans are fighting with.
Okay.
And again, you're carrying so much ammo, you fire around a few minutes, okay, just adjust off, fire again, which is pretty common. The average is about 14 rounds fired per kill. And this is the Germans, 11 to 14 rounds fired per kill. Because there's nothing mechanically wrong with the gun. There's nothing mechanically wrong with the sight, but when you're under stress and when the enemy is actively trying not to get hit, you're going to miss from time to time. And that's where the figures are. So you have acquisition. Basically anybody but the Germans win on acquisition time. When it comes to the actual engagement, the Germans do better because they generally have better optics with better range estimation systems. And when it comes to speed of engagements, the Americans win by default because they're the only ones with stabilizers.
Okay.
So these are all factors of what is necessary to get around on target before you look at the characteristics of the gun. So that's why, yes, that's the optical fire control system, and that's before we get to the whole matter of are you manually cranking? Do you have a rough traverse versus a fine traverse like the T-34s did? Do you have a manual elevation versus a powered elevation? So again, when they put the 70 pounder in the Firefly, they had to disconnect the powered elevation system and the stabilizer because this is a big, huge freaking gun, and something had to go. Well, that's why now when you look inside, again, people don't look at this. The Firefly gunner, he's got one hand way the hell down here, he's got one hand here, and his head is like this, trying to get the gun on target. He's not a comfortable and happy camper, and he's slower than another Sherman. So you got to see first. You got to acquire the target first. You got to range the target first, shoot first, and then because you will probably miss, you got to get the next round on target quickly as well, or at least the next round downrange. So that's very cool. That's a long answer to: is the supporting system important compared to the gun? Yes, it is. And as I say, different countries have different philosophies.
This is great. I'm going to know far more about tanks in general by the end of this. Already do than when I started. Our next one is from Jared. We're on our final page here, but Jared says, regarding development and procurement of vehicles, do nations other than the U.S. experience significant issues or complexities due to their respective military-industrial complexes or politics? Thinking specifically of the development of the Bradley and the overproduction of the M1 Abrams.
Oh, yes. People from every country will tell you stories.
Sure they will.
One of them. So there was a book by G. McLeod Ross. He was a British officer from World War II, and he wrote a book called The Business of Tanks. He eventually ended up being part of the British tank procurement mission in the U.S., so he was able to compare the way the Americans did things with the way the British did things. And he is not light on the scathing of the British system by way they had no centralized tank design process, the way the requirements would go one way, and so one of my videos, Operation Think Tank, David Fletcher from the British Tank Museum, he made him the epic mustache.
Fantastic British mustache.
Yeah. He was commenting, he was going, oh, you sent me the requirements for this tank, and do you want it welded? We don't weld things, we've always riveted them. So we're going to rivet this tank instead, things like that. Supposedly, the system is... I'm going to see if I can give you a chart. I used this in one of my videos on the current U.S. Army procurement system. And it is, I don't understand it. I've taken a course on this thing, just a lightweight course as part of my majors course, and I still don't understand it. God help the guys that actually become functional area procurement, because they must be bored to tears. Amazingly complex, and it's kind of like we have all these checks and balances to make sure that there's no corruption or anything else, that we're probably better off accepting a bit of corruption to get the end result, a good enough result, faster and cheaper. So overproduction of the M1. So what he's talking about here is the Army went a couple of years ago and said, we don't want the money for the M1, we have enough M1s, which arguably is true, we've got thousands of them sitting in storage, we want to spend the money on this instead. Congress turns around and says, no, you will buy more M1s, because if we don't, then the factory in Lima, Ohio shuts down. And so they kept it going. Now, I personally think the Army was playing political game here. I think they realized just as much as Congress that we could not shut down one remaining tank factory in the country, because once we shut it down,
It's a lot harder to get it back.
Exactly. That is a skill set that we're going to lose.
You then become the British with no domestic small arms production.
Or I think tank ammunition production now as well. And so my personal guess is that the Army realized that there was no way in hell that Congress was going to let the shutdown. It was a PR ploy to get something else funded in addition. But anyway. But another counterexample is Japan. The Type 90 tank entered service, I think, 1991, give or take, 89 or 91, something like that. It stopped production in 2009. They built about 340 tanks in this 20-something year period. The average was about 20 tanks a year, or 2 tanks a month, a little under 2 tanks a month. Now, I strongly suspect that Mitsubishi can build more than 2 tanks a month if they wanted to. I'm hypothesizing here, but that is my guess, that Mitsubishi Heavy Industries can build more than 2 tanks a month, but they didn't. And the reason being is that the Japanese have very specific requirements for their tanks, and no other tank produced anywhere else in the world will truly meet them. But if they built all 340 tanks in a year, let's say, and Mitsubishi goes, well, no more use for you guys, lads. We're shutting down the line. You can all happily go off and get other jobs. So assuming they ever do that in Japan, as opposed to finding make work for them. And then 20 years later, they want to design the Type 10. They can't because Mitsubishi shut down, and it will either be far more expensive to start up the new line and hire people and train people, and you have that lost institutional knowledge of some people that are just not coming back to make the new Type 10. The Type 90 was, at the time, the most expensive tank in the world. Like a unit cost of $7 million in 1990 dollars, when even today the A2 Abrams or the A3 Abrams comes in about $6.5 to $7 million of today's dollars. So it was ridiculously expensive, but they had to do it for political reasons and national security reasons.
Right.
They had to be deliberately ineffective and inefficient for this to happen.
I think there's a very good argument to be made for maintaining that sort of domestic industry. Like, if you want to have a military, if you think it is valuable to be producing your own small arms domestically, it's not really something that can be done intermittently every 20 or 30 years. It really is far more effective to maintain that production somehow.
Right, now that's true. You've got production and you have design. So there's no reason that your factories have to produce your design. So look at Westland. The British can design their own helicopters, but the AH-64 Apache is made in Somerset. Well, it was made. I don't know if they're still making them or not. So you can make people say, oh, they're doing it for jobs. They're doing it for... That doesn't mean to say it has to be your own design. But if you maintain the capability to design your own, make your own designs, as opposed to having to contract out the F-16 made in wherever. Mm-hmm. No, okay, there's your argument.
There's, I think, an excellent analogy here to small arms with Springfield Armory. The purpose of Springfield Armory was not to build all of America's small arms. It was to be a design bureau that would then produce the tooling. They would build a production line and then provide it to industry in the United States.
I think Rock Island would have done the same thing for larger equipment.
Probably, yeah. I don't know about the larger stuff, but that was Springfield's purpose, and it was so that we could maintain the institutional knowledge for the design and the tooling, and then it got shut down in the 60s.
Anyway, you got to move on to battery number 3.
Yes, I do. All right, we are now on our 3rd battery, so let's move along here.
I have to move to my camera next.
Possibly, yes. Let's see. So we're going to go to Jason, who says, in World War I, was a machine gun or a small cannon more practical on a tank in combat? I'm going to assume he is... Well, I guess this applies to the British, because they had the male-female...
Yeah, the male and hermaphrodites. They split the difference. They had machine guns and cannons on the tank.
And then the French, with the FT-17s, had a machine gun version and a 37mm cannon version.
Which is correct. FT.
Didn't I say?
No, you said FT-17. Very, very common.
My bad. The Renault.
Okay, that works.
So which was better?
I think that after the war, you look at, I still don't think it was sorted out during the war. So you look after the war, you look at how the FTs were armed, let's say the Italians with the Fiat 2000. They generally armed theirs with twin machine guns. And it wasn't until the 1930 version that they put a cannon into their FTs, Fiat 2000s. Imagine a turbocharged FT painted red.
So we'll go like 10 miles an hour.
Oh no, it did better than that. It did 20, 25.
Wow.
Oh, it was a freaking speed demon.
That is.
They had the guys in Maranello. It's like, we haven't invented Ferrari yet, so we're going to go into the tank industry. So, and of course the Americans had the cult of the machine gun, and they were very heavily influenced by the French. The British went a different way, but, and in fairness, the Americans did this as well. When the British put a cannon on their medium tanks in the 1920s, it was a 3-pounder, and it was intended to use against other tanks. It wasn't intended to be used as much as an infantry weapon. For infantry, for dealing with other things, well, guess what they put on? Machine guns. And if you look at the M2 as an entered service, the M2 medium as an entered service, they had a 37mm cannon up top for use against armor. And then you had machine guns freaking everywhere outside the tank for shooting it. God knows what he wanted to shoot at. So the lesson learned at the end of World War I seemed to be in favor of the machine gun, and it doesn't seem to have moved in favor of the cannon until the 1930s.
Okay.
The caveat on that is there weren't very many tanks built between World War I and the 1930s, and it changed that.
How much tank-on-tank combat happened before, like, the Spanish Civil War?
Not a hell of a lot.
Because there was effectively zero in World War I.
Yeah, a couple bouts here or there. Maybe in the Russian Civil War there might have been one or two. And
like
even if expeditions in Africa, probably not.
Even if it turns out the cannon was more important, would anyone have had the experience to know it? The cannon as an anti-tank weapon.
Well, obviously the British figured it out though, because that's exactly what they did. British and the Americans.
Okay.
That said, when you look at again, economics comes into it. The French build a new series of infantry tanks in the 1930s, the Renault and Hotchkiss and the FCM, the little 3 god-awful tanks, which I have done videos on. But they used short little 37mm cannon. I mean, a hand grenade probably has a bigger explosive charge. But there was an economic reason for this, because they had already built several thousand of these damn things for the FTs.
Okay.
And it was a lot cheaper for the French to stick these onto the new generation of tank. Whereas when you went to the Somme and the Char B1, you're now looking at 47mm guns, which are high velocity and useful in the anti-tank role. But again, we're talking late 30s, so by this point, almost everybody had figured out, oh, the enemy has tanks. And it's one of the weird things. I've done a bunch of doctrine videos, and you see a lot of times that the countries are thinking of, we are using tanks, and they're assuming that because so few countries have tanks, that they don't need to worry about tank-on-tank or anti-tank options, because nobody else has tanks, it's just us. Until eventually, in the 1930s, everybody suddenly has some sort of armored vehicles, and it becomes an issue.
Okay.
But again, these armored vehicles that have issues, I got a 50 caliber machine gun. That'll deal with the tank.
It would.
Which in most cases it did. Or
Yeah.
a 20mm was the next step, the TKS tankettes, or the Panzer II. Okay, it's an autocannon, we laugh at it now, but if you're in a Vickers Mark 6 Light, and the other guy has a 20mm, you're not happy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's coming right through the side. Andrew says the U.S. Army is testing the XM913 50mm chain gun for use in the future NGCV. Is there an actual role for this kind of firepower on an infantry fighting vehicle? Isn't this too small for anti-tank use, but too big for everything else?
It's not too big. There's no such kill like overkill.
Well, we were just talking about a 20mm coax being kind of too big for the role.
When you also had a 105 handy.
Okay.
But in this case, you're talking about the 50 presumably not being in coax. You're talking about it being the primary weapon system.
I would assume so.
Obviously, the Army thinks that there was a role for it, or they wouldn't have asked for it.
Okay.
That said, again, pros and cons. You look at the CV-90 is probably the best example of this, because you can get the CV-90 with almost any sort of weapon system on the planet. And if you look at the way they've been adopted by the European nations, The Swedes went with a 40, the Finns went with a 30, the Danish went with a 35. And per round, you'll get more bang for your buck out of the 40 because you got a bigger charge and you've got fewer expenses of those fuses that I was talking about per round. So if you have, let's say, taking a number out of my ass, 200 rounds of 40mm in a CV90, that's only 200 microchips and radars and whatever the hell else is in your round that you got to pay for.
Which costs the same, basically, no matter how big the cartridge is.
And for all I know, maybe more expensive than the smaller ones because of the price. But the problem is that you only got X many rounds. And if I recall, the 40mm has to be hand-loaded in clips, like the old befores. Whereas if you got something much smaller that can be belt-fed, like a 30mm, you're carrying lots of ammunition, you can shoot at lots of targets all day, and it can all be automatically fed through the chain gun. And I think the 35 is on a belt as well. So I suspect that right now the happy medium between capability and lethality, so you have a big enough bang to make it useful. You have a big enough round that you can have the fuse. It's a small enough round that you can have a lot of them and you can have them belt fed. So far, 35mm seems to be about that happy sweet spot.
Okay.
The 50mm, I'm sure that you can put a 50mm into a Bradley. And since it's a chain gun, it is belt fed. How big is that belt? How long is it going to take you to reload the belt when you have fired off the 25 rounds or whatever that is already in it? How many spare rounds can you carry in the back of your vehicle? So if the Army has done the maths, and I'm sure there are number crunchers that are doing this, that says that this 50mm works, then yes, there's a battlefield road.
Okay.
I mean, there is nothing I can think of that I would say I would rather shoot at that with a 40mm than a 50mm. Bigger is always going to win, but all the supporting problems of the size of the round are I think that's the question you have to ask. Not is there a use for it, but is it practical?
Is there a useful armor piercing capability in that?
Sure, AFV is getting bigger and heavier.
Okay.
So what used to, the 20mm Rheinmetall, the RH202, which is a ridiculous rate of fire, was plenty enough for most light armored vehicles on the battlefield that were no actual tanks. Then it came up to the 25mm or the 30mm, the Soviet 30mm, and then people got armored against the 30mm. So now you went to the saber round on the 25, and now things are coming up that are proof against not against tank ammo, but against the saber rounds on the 25. So you still need a bigger round. There was always this race between the armor and the ammo.
Okay. Let's see. I need a cool nickname. It says During the World War II, the U.S. Army used fast, powerful, but relatively lightly armored tank destroyers to go toe-to-toe with the Wehrmacht's best, but abandoned the concept after VE Day. How effective do you believe the tank destroyer concept would be on a modern battlefield against a peer or near-peer adversary?
Did they abandon the concept?
You would be the one to know, not me.
Okay, so the tank destroyer concept was you had a mass. It was developed against the German panzers, so they figured that you could not stop the German panzers at the front line. Countries had tried, they failed. And you could never make enough anti-tank guns to hold any particular portion of the line, wherever it was that the Germans decided to concentrate their force. So working on the default the Germans were going to punch through, you needed to have a specialized force that was highly mobile to deal with this armor penetration, and their function was to destroy armor. So if you want a highly mobile force that is optimized to react against enemy armor and is very well equipped to do so, that sounds a lot like an AH-64 attack helicopter battalion with 16 anti-tank missiles on each helicopter.
Flying tank destroyers.
They are. Tank destroyers as a concept certainly haven't gone away. There's a lot of vehicles out there that are lightweight, mobile, with an anti-tank weapon system. The LAV-AT, the M901 ITV, the Centauro, the Sprut D, whatever you want, whatever vehicle you want to call. The tank destroyer concept as terms of a unit of specialized vehicles that would travel en masse to deal with an armored unit, that's your helicopters.
I never would have thought of that. Brilliant. Last question here. Christopher, what is the strangest way someone has defeated a tank?
I probably don't know it, but I'm sure there's all sorts of bizarre. Okay, so one example by Harry Idy in one of my videos, he mentioned that there was a Tiger that was being dealt with by a bunch of Sherman 75s. The 75s, for whatever reason, were not punching through the Tiger, maybe it was too far away, so they simply pelted it with high explosives. The crew were inside, they had been found to expire from concussion.
Wow.
They developed a technique that to fire white phosphorus rounds at tanks. The Germans would either get choked out, or maybe the engine would catch fire, or they would just think their tank was on fire and they would bail out. Because if the tank is on fire, that's the only time you're authorized to get out. So your tank is defeated that way.
That works. Fighting fair is fighting stupid.
Yeah. You can dig a big hole, cover it up with matting and leaves, get the tank to fall into it. That's actually kind of a stupid way of doing it, but it works. There's a video of, I think it was from Syria, some guy just runs up to a tank, lobs a hand grenade, and slings it down the gun tube of the tank. That guy, I'm amazed he was able to run, given the size of his balls. But he did it. Tank blew up. Which isn't a stupid way of doing it. Well,
if it's
arguably it's a stupid way of doing it because you got a great chance of getting killed.
If it's stupid but it works, it's not stupid.
It's really stupid. Yeah.
What happens when you got an HE round loaded in the gun and it detonates in the chamber? Like someone drops a hand grenade down on top of it.
Probably nothing until you fire the HE round and you get all the shrapnel that murders the inside of your gun.
Yeah.
The chances are that your gun tube will then explode. The tank will survive, but the gun tube won't be happy.
Okay.
It'll be a mission kill. The best use of a tank, the stupidest use of a tank, was I think in the Chinese Civil War. They didn't have any tanks, so what they did was they got a car and they put a big flag on the top saying "Big Scary Tank," and they went up to a town and they captured the town with a big scary tank. And then, of course, you got the tiger faces in Korea, which was supposed to scare because it was the year of the tiger. And it was actually not just the year of the tiger.
Fools, that was 1944.
Yes, that was the problem. So they came up with the idea in 1950, or whatever, I'm pretty sure it's 1950, that Lunar New Year, or whatever the Chinese work off. But apparently it's not just the animals, they also have metals associated. So every time you go around, it's a different metal. So this was the year of the steel tiger, or something like that. And this was great. This is a tank of steel. We'll put tiger faces on it. Fantastic. By the time they actually launch Operation Ripper, it has moved to the year of the rabbit. Oops. But it was a great excuse for people to set up their tanks, paint up their tanks. Other stupid ways of there are probably quite a few. I have not researched stupid ways that... Google it! I'm sure somebody on Google is going to have an answer for this.
Dropping a hand grenade down the barrel is a pretty good one.
That was ballsy as hell.
Yeah.
Otherwise, a killing tank... There was a book I read once, Cold War Hot, but the theory was that you put submunitions of vodka, then little plastic bottles of vodka. You fire submunitions of that by rocket, MLRS, into an area that the Russians are advancing, and they would see these. They get drunk on the vodka, and then you can kill them.
You just poison the vodka.
They'll probably notice after the first couple of people keeled over. You want to encourage them to keep drinking. But that's a brilliant idea. I don't know if anybody actually put it into practice.
Interesting.
But I'd like to see that happening. Right. I guess that's the answer. Was there another question about a vehicle that should have been built that wasn't or something?
We have the option for that one. I don't know if we have the battery life on the camera for it.
Well, let's try.
Okay. So the other question was akin to guns like the 1898 Schwarzlos, which were technically speaking and ergonomically speaking very nice guns, but failed to become commercial or military successes for reasons not of their own fault. Are there similar vehicles that, like, this was... We were talking about this a little bit before.
Yeah.
Normally, the forgotten guns, the prototype, unique and innovative tanks that don't get produced, usually there's a very good reason for it.
Yes. Which may not necessarily be because the tank didn't work.
True.
It may have been that the reason the tank existed was no longer viable.
Right.
The T-28 super heavy tank, a 100-ton monster, 105mm gun, 12 inches of armor. They originally built it with 8 inches, and they fired at it, and they realized it wasn't enough, so they put a full foot of armor. This thing was designed to go up against a Siegfried line, go up the bunker fortifications, the big concrete, the Maginot Line equivalent, go, F you Germans, I'm coming through, and it would have done absolutely stellar at that role. The problem was that the war ended before it entered service. Yeah. And they also realized that, actually, this is a pretty stupid idea, because we'll just sit an extra couple of 100 yards that way, we'll shoot at you with a 155mm self-propelled gun and a direct fire roll, and you have the same damn effect. So, overtaken by immense. Another reason might be if it's not worth it. So, when they tested the 90mm turret on the M18 tank destroyer, the idea was you already had a really fast, very successful vehicle. Now you put a bigger gun on it. And they tested and they realized it works. Fantastic. And there didn't seem to be any problems with reliability like there were with the jumbos or anything like that. But you look at the archives and it says, okay, it will work, but in order to convert all these vehicles, we've got to pull out the M18s that we built out of service to convert them. And the M18s are already doing pretty effectively. It's not worth it. So it never entered service.
Like maybe in a year, if we're still fighting, and now they're not working so well, then we do it.
That's the size of it. So the U.S. Army actually didn't do a lot of hypothetical development work. That's why the M36 was made in the first place. Nobody wanted it. Nobody saw a need for a 90mm tank destroyer. But they decided, just in case we need one, go ahead and build it anyway. Just build it, test it out, test the prototype, make the plans, and then we can turn it on if we have to. Then there were ones that worked fantastically, but were just too damn expensive, whatever. So you can look at almost any number of Cold War War vehicles. I mean, the MBT-70 is a great one. The MBT-70 had a problem, though, because the two different countries that were designing it, Germany and France, Germany and the US, had two entirely different concepts as to what they wanted the tank to do in the first place. Yet they still, because of political reasons, wanted to we want to be cost effective and only have one tank for the two countries. It's like, look, you want apples, you want oranges. I'm sorry, you cannot genetically combine these things in one single thing that does two things. So, as I said, there's no end to these things. The Locust, the M22 light tank, in theory, there is no reason on earth why that should not work. It was designed to be carried by a C-54 airplane, flown to wherever it had to go, be reassembled in less than 5 minutes, and then go off to battle. And it would have done so. The problem was it had to land a really big, expensive C-54 Skymaster in enemy territory, on an airfield, which you were probably trying to capture, which was the whole point of sending the airborne forces over there. Okay, that didn't work out so well. They gave them all to the British. The British tried using them once. That was the end of that. Others. We got a whole bunch of MATV or MRAPs that we're trying to get rid of now. We no longer need. Because they were built for one specific purpose, and that purpose was over and done with. Other vehicles that probably were really cool. Some of the missile vehicles. If you go to Kubica, the Soviets put all sorts of vehicles out there that were created, but ultimately this is a brilliant idea. They were really thinking outside the box, but it doesn't work. So they had missile vehicles, what have you. Laser vehicles. So the Bradley Stingray, they sent 2 to Desert Storm, and its primary weapon was a laser.
Okay, I didn't know that was the thing.
It's not a Star Wars laser that you shoot it and it blows up. They're barely getting those to work now for anti-missile systems and so on.
Right.
This was you shoot the laser at the optics of something, and it fries the optics, or it kills whatever is used to track the flare on the back of a missile. But they're not eye-safe lasers. And somebody decided it was against the Hague Declarations or the Geneva Conventions or whatever to use lasers against personnel. And the Army's policy is you do not issue anything to anyone if misuse of it could be against the Geneva Conventions or
That's not a bad standard.
It's not a bad
Because
standard.
it will get misused if
It will
can
be, yeah. Or even if nobody's thinking about it, it's, oh my god, the only thing I have in my inventory right now is this thing, and they're coming at me, and I will shoot my 15mm high explosive round. Banned, forbidden. You can shoot it against aircraft all you want, but you can't shoot it at troops. But if that's all you have, that's what you're going to use. Same with white phosphorus. White phosphorus cannot be used against infantry. Really?
Yeah.
Would you like to show me the regulation on that? And that's why it's issued to artillery units, is to be used. And if you look at the FM, it says if somebody's attacking you, you can use white phosphorus in the direct fire role. Now, ideally, it says shoot at a tanks or whatever, but if there's infantry there, oops, okay, it works too. And if it was illegal for use in the direct fire role, the army would not have issued it. They would use HC smoke for the smoke missions or whatever. So that's your default policy. So the Bradley Stingray never went any further than that. There was a couple of the Russians came up with a sort of equivalent. It looked like a TOS with massive laser battery up top. The British developed one. They deployed it in '82. Never used it, but they deployed it. The Chinese sort of had one on their Type 99 tanks, but that's been replaced by something else, a radar version, a radar thing instead. So that's another reason why something will be developed. It does work, but for whatever reason, it doesn't get implemented.
Okay.
So I think I've covered most of the criteria. The M6 heavy tank, it worked. It was, at the time it was built, that 3-inch gun was the most powerful gun in the world on a tank. It weighed over 40-something ton, and they couldn't get enough of them overseas to be worth it. So, I say it worked, it kind of worked. There were still quirks that needed to be worked out before it was truly battle-worthy. And the Americans were very picky about sending anything overseas if it wasn't absolutely bulletproof reliable.
Okay.
Unlike some other countries. But it was just too heavy to be used. The armored force look at it and kind of go, great, thanks, you made a heavy tank. We didn't ask for it, we don't need it, we don't want it. Go away, find something else to do. We use it for propaganda.
Okay.
Right.
All
So
right.
I think now we'll call it quits.
Yes, we still have a few moments of battery life left. So, this Q&A has been brought to you by the fantastic patrons on Forgotten Weapons, and apparently at least 2 patrons of Chieftain's Hat.
Chieftain, yeah.
And,
It's just the Chieftain. Chieftain's Hat is one of my TV shows.
oops, sorry, just
The channel
The
is the Chieftain.
which I have linked in the description text below. So if you haven't seen
Thank
it,
you.
if you haven't seen it, and you're still watching now, clearly you are interested in this subject. So, there's good news. There is a wealth of cool videos for you to go check out. And also brought to you by, what is
Middleton's. They're out of Cork.
Okay,
Irish whiskey.
excellent. Irish whiskey. I can be plied with Irish whiskey as well
well
as
as Scotch.
Scotch whiskey. So, I think that's about all we've got for today. Thank you very much, and I'll have another Q&A next month. Thanks for watching.
Some other poor unfortunate person that sit down in front of it has to ply you with alcohol. But that's the trick, lads. That's the trick.
There you go. Thanks for watching, guys.